Hello, Mark here. If you haven't seen Rogue One yet and you want to stay spoiler free, I would advise to listen to this podcast after you've seen it. Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to episode 33 of Nerdology. With me today, I have Mr. Simon Brett.
Hello.
And Rob Irwin.
G'day, listeners.
Thank you both for joining me, guys. We thought we'd get together and have a little chat about a little film that's just come out called Rogue One. So, expectations, guys. When you first heard about this sort of splinter offshoot from the main sort of story, if you like, what were your initial reactions? I'll go to Rob first.
I was very excited because I was a long-time reader of the Extended Universe novels, and in the Extended Universe, I particularly liked the novels that didn't concentrate so much on the main characters. I'm thinking of a series in particular called X-Wing, where aside from Wedge Antilles and say some cameos from the Lukes and Hands of this galaxy, it was generally a new bunch of people getting around in X-Wings, having adventures. They split off and had another squadron called Wraith Squadron that did a lot of espionage-type stuff. And I thought, hey, this could be very similar to the X-Wing books and the kind of books in general I like, where it's more about what the smaller people in the universe are doing. Not the dwarves, but the lesser characters. And I got instantly excited from that moment.
And what about you, Simon?
I'm less of an extended universe person, probably down to time. in as much as I adored the films. I used to get the comic, but the comic used to constantly disappoint me. The old Marvel comic. So I kind of just focused on the films and maybe the books, because I kind of figured that somewhere along the line it had all gone through. I think as long as it had gone through George Lucas's head, I took it on that was canon. So. I've never really had time for the extended universe stuff. So I mean, when I first heard, obviously there was the double whammy, wasn't there? Because I think it came through as a whole big thing that Disney were going to put out these, as well as 3 more actual episodes. There was going to be these films in between as well. So it was a heck of a lot to take on board in one go. But yeah, much like Rob, quite excited. I kind of hoped it wasn't going to dilute things too much and that it was going to all be quite cohesive.
Well, there is that fear, isn't there? Because, I mean, Marvel have done overall a pretty decent job of, although it's a production line, on the whole, it doesn't feel like they're going for quantity over quality. And I'm guessing that's the sort of template for what they're hoping to achieve with the Star Wars movies.
I mean, I've heard people say this production line that Marvel do, and in turn Disney, literally saying, "Oh, it's this machine that just pumps out films all the time." And I think if you actually watch them, you'll realise that it doesn't really work like that. And certainly each project is treated individually, and I would hope the same would happen with Star Wars.
I have to say, I've been looking at the reactions online, and they're generally very favourable. I've seen 1 or 2 comments about people saying, well, this is the movie they wanted episode 7 to be, which I don't quite see so much, but certainly in my mind, this is much more going way back what I think a lot of fans were hoping from the prequels, which is a whole other story. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I guess what you're saying there, or what they might be saying, is that this feels more Star Wars perhaps than the prequels, or the Star Wars they have in their head at least, and that's maybe why they would have liked the prequels to have been like this, just because it feels more Star Wars.
Yeah. To me, episode 7 was quite refreshing because for the first time in I don't know how long, I think we touched upon this when we talked about this last time, Rob, it felt like you didn't know where things were heading, and that there was a certain enjoyment from that. I don't know.
There's again, without spending this podcast defending things all the time, I think one of the big criticisms of Force Awakens was, it's too similar to the old ones, and it's virtually the same story as the first film, and all this sort of thing. And you sort of think, well, there is a kind of a template of sorts for the saga films. They do run in certain cycles. Yeah. And that's the whole thing of this mythic, long-standing story that's supposedly been told for hundreds of years, and from hundreds of years from now, that it will always kind of feel that way. The stories will always be kind of tied to that to a certain degree. And I think what The Force Awakens did was it did get things back on track, and it kind of almost got people back on board. And it got a new audience. It got the old audience. It got the new audience. There were a few people who said, it should have done all the stuff that they're saying Rogue One is doing. Well, that's an awful lot for one film to do after all this time. That's a lot. That's a big ask for one movie. And I think The Force Awakens, for me, as good as it was doing a job. So I think things will improve from now on. And I think The Force Awakens needed to be what it was in order that we did get Rogue One, and that did work.
I think that's the benefit of having these spin-offs, is that you can perhaps go to, as Rob was sort of intimating, you can go to different places narratively than you might have been able to do in the sort of what people regard as the canon.
Yeah, the saga movies definitely have a feel and a flow. I mean, when we think of the next one, I'm not being spoiled on it at all. I know nothing about it, but you've got to assume the Imperial remnant will fight back after they've had their super weapon destroyed. Rey is obviously off to be trained, like Luke was in Empire Strikes Back. There are going to be so many parallels to Empire Strikes Back. We can already safely say right now, a year out before we podcast about it, probably it's going to be a bit like Empire Strikes Back, and that's not a surprise. Although some people will act very surprised when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's complained about the amount of limbs that are getting chopped off, have they? I mean, that was
no.
There's an inconsistency there. Now I think of it, those things have always been happening. All the little lines that come out, I have a bad feeling about this, which was a brilliant moment in Rogue One.
There's a lot of fan service in that movie, which for the most part I quite enjoyed. There were the odd one or two I thought, it feels a little bit kind of shoehorned in, but on the whole, I think it worked.
Which ones do you think were shoehorned in? For me, if any of them, it was possibly the fellas from the cantina in A New Hope popping up and running into them in the street.
Well, upon leaving the screening, me and Simon went to a midnight screening, and I had to be at work about half an hour after that, so that was probably not the best idea I've ever had. But I mentioned, as we were sort of having a bit of a chat, I think we were both quite positive. We were talking about one or two little things, and to me it seemed, I don't know, with C-3PO and R2-D2 having made their little cameo, I know they've been in every movie, so there's that sort of continuity that perhaps people are expecting, but I wasn't sure that was really necessary.
I agree. It was kind of like it was clinging on to the continuity. It's like, well, we're an intelligent audience. We can work out that this is happening all at the same time. So we didn't need, as kind of nice as it was, the 3PO and R2 thing was quite, I don't know what the word is. It's not clumsy, but it didn't feel particularly subtle. And like you say, the bit in the crowd with the guy from the cantina.
I actually quite enjoyed that. I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah, it was fun and it was surprising. It was like, look who they've put in. But later, after I thought about it, I thought, did they really need that? I don't know. Whereas other fan servicey things, perhaps like having Grand Moff Tarkin in there so extensively, was a little different.
So I'm just intrigued to know, the two of you, were you sort of relatively spoiler-free going into this, or had you had plot points explained to you before going into the theatre? We start with Rob first.
I deliberately tried to be as unspoiled as possible. I'm not one of these people who are like, oh no, I don't want to know anything. You know, if I had learned something, fine. But I wanted to have a different experience to The Force Awakens, where I don't know if anyone remembers from one of my podcasts or blogs around the time, I basically called the plot scene for scene about a day or two out from the movie.
I remember that.
Because I had read so much and I'd been on spoiler sites and I literally knew what was going to happen. I thought, I want to have a different experience this time. That said, the running joke is you always know how this is going to end. They find the Death Star plans because we've seen that back in 1977. So there are bits of this movie where you know they happen, and there are bits where you assume they happen. For example, just knowing that the team could get wiped out because they don't have to fulfill any roles in later films, and hey, that's what happened.
Simon?
That was quite funny because that's the one thing I read about a day before I saw the film. Was you had one really, well, you know, I'm not going to even use a word. So there was a thread on a Force Awakens thing, and somebody piped up in the middle of it all and said, "You do all know that everyone dies," and I took it with a pinch of salt because I remember reading a newspaper article. There was a big double spread newspaper article in 1983, just before Return of the Jedi came out, which basically said that everyone dies in Return of the Jedi. So I think I've seen that story appear before every film since then. So I took it with a certain pinch of salt, but I did sort of think to myself, theoretically that could happen. But I know that we've sort of had various other characters in theory have disappeared off the face of the galaxy. You know, there's still talk of Mace Windu, isn't there? And
oh, really?
Yeah, it was. Trying to catch up with Clone Wars. See, this is one thing. I haven't even watched all of the Clone Wars. So is it Ahsoka? Is that the character's name, Rob?
Ahsoka Tano?
Yeah. Did
she
disappear and then turn up again or something?
I never finished Clone Wars myself, but I know she gets kicked out of the Jedi Order and reappears in Star Wars Rebels as an older character.
Ah, right. That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
But in terms of Mace Windu, I heard this during the week. I know there are many Snoke theories on who Supreme Leader Snoke is in the new saga films. And I was at work, and this lady I work with said her son thinks he is Mace Windu, who survived that fall and got all distorted by the Force lightning, of course, and he is Snoke. And I said, oh, that's quite imaginative, but I'm not sure. There are about 10,000 Snoke theories out there, to the point where my mate Steele Saunders, who does a podcast called Steel Wars, has made a sticker which he gives out at conventions, and it says, "Your Snoke theory sucks." And it's done in the old Kenner logo that they used to put on the toys. It's really funny. He's handed out hundreds, if not thousands, of these stickers to promote his podcast. Yeah, your Snoke theory sucks.
Excellent. As far as that's concerned, I'm just convinced it's nobody we've seen on screen before. It can't be.
No, I don't think so either.
No, I think it's an original character. But the kind of spoiler thing came to my mind because I suppose in the back of your head he's got to crop up somewhere, but it was quite a surprise to see Tarkin pop up early on in the movie. How did you guys feel that came across? Do you think it worked?
Well, when he first appeared on screen, much like Rob, I was very unspoiled, really. I literally thought we were going to see the back of his head and possibly a reflection in the window, and that was going to be it. So to have him actually turn around and then start acting as well was quite something.
Yeah.
And I think I said to you, Mark, afterwards, is that with the CGI, there was there was the uncanny valley thing going on very slightly. You know, it was only every now and again. It was certain angles of his head. Certainly, the movement was very good because a lot of the time the lips in CGI are almost too smooth, aren't they? They don't quite.
I think they pulled it off really well. I
think they did. I actually found the voice more distracting than the face.
What did you think, Rob?
Yeah, look, I was blown away by it because I had been thinking leading up to the film that he would be essentially replaced in this film by Ben Mendelsohn's character. And that's why the Ben Mendelsohn character was in there as Director Krennic. He'd be in charge of the Death Star because, hey, well, they can't get Peter Cushing anymore, so it's Ben Mendelsohn. And then all of a sudden to have him appear, I was really surprised, stunned by it. And apparently it had been out there for a year that he was in the film. I'd completely missed all of that. That's how unspoiled I was for this film, surprisingly, and I was delighted. I thought it was great. I think it's very under wraps how they did it. I hope it comes out on a DVD extra or something. I think they've had a real actor on set, and they've probably had the dots all over his face, and then just put a sort of a mask over his face digitally, which is perhaps why the lips go so well, because they're based on real lips. They're not just doing it in computer. So I thought it was great. I really had no problem with it.
Yeah, I was really impressed.
I accepted it. By the end of the film, I'd accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
Which was, I mean, are you going to put this podcast out as a complete spoil zone? So
I'll put something on the front. I'll put something on the front end just to say this has got major plot spoilers. So listen until you.
It's a shame in some respects to kind of reveal the very end of the film so early in the podcast, but the reveal at the end felt a little bit like, oh, you've seen what we can do with Tarkin. Now have a look at this. And I don't think it worked as well.
No, I don't. I just feel like they could have left it with just a shot of her back, and that would have been perfectly okay with me. I mean, in one respect, it was, again, quite impressive, but I just don't think, like you said, you mentioned Uncanny Valley, and I think that did come across with the Leia character. What did you think, Rob?
Yeah, definitely not as convincing. And I was hoping it was going to be Carrie Fisher's daughter, who everyone says looks a lot like her, and I think she does to some degree. In fact, when she was cast for The Force Awakens, she has a few little roles in that, or a little role in that, I should say. People assumed when they first heard that she was playing Leia in a flashback. Which didn't turn out to be the case. So I thought if they were going to get anyone to play her, it might have been her daughter, but no. It was someone else. It was an actress. I saw her name in the closing credits. I don't recall it now. And again, perhaps CGI superimposed over a real face, but just not as convincing. In fact, Doc Hume, who we all know, has referred to it as a Cabbage Patch Kid face. So there you go.
That's harsh. But yeah. Pretty accurate. It's strange when you think obviously we've got the Han Solo movie on its way, and we know that that's been recast. So why not do the same? I don't know.
Yeah, but she wasn't there for
I don't
long.
want it to come across that we're completely negative, because I did enjoy it. I really did come out of it feeling I quite enjoyed that. Were there personal highlights for you guys? If we start with Simon first this time.
Well, the moment my fanboy moment, when I thought, oh my God, this is so good, and I'm completely back in Star Wars, was when they landed on Yavin 4. And there was the hangar with all the ships and everything, and it was like, God, that is so good. That is so accurate. And that's kind of what sold it. It felt slightly slow at the start. Of course, Mark, it didn't help that we had a couple of girls talking behind us in the cinema.
Oh, God, yeah. Cinema etiquette. It's, it's pretty basic, really. You get a big announcement on the screen saying, it's time for the main event. Now switch off your phones, finish your conversations. It's time to enjoy the film.
Never mind the fact that we were there at midnight.
Yeah, exactly. So that someone's paid good money to go to a midnight screening, and they're talking through the first sort of 5-10 minutes of the film. And in the end, I just had to turn around and say, would you mind stop talking, please? You
were very polite, but you were firm.
Yeah, it's just kind of frustrating when you're trying to watch the movie.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was... I think that was the point where I can't think how far into the film that was. It was a fair way in, wasn't it? But I think just overall, the fact that it felt like it was in the Star Wars universe and it was behaving kind of, I don't know. It was, Rob probably feels the same. It felt like the film you always knew they could make if they wanted to, and they never did. And now they've got the abilities to do that. And it's almost too much to take in some respects, but it does. I've read one very small review which sort of said about it feels like a real film, and you can rate this like, rather than, because we recently got asked by JR on the Blue Box podcast. We recently got asked to give our sort of top 10 favourite films, and I don't tend to stick Star Wars in there because it doesn't operate in the same level. And by that I don't mean that you sort of make excuses for it, but if somebody says to me, "Oh, A New Hope," that's not actually a really very good film at all. In fact, none of them are particularly good films. And I'm like, well, it's Star Wars. I don't really care.
Yeah, exactly.
But this you could actually stick alongside any other movie, and people could probably watch this out, without having seen a Star Wars film, and could probably get a fair amount from it. It does operate really well just on a film level because it's been extracted from that saga thing and from that whole, like you say, that cycle and those parallels. It doesn't rely on that. So yeah,
I think also what helps is, although we mentioned the sort of CGI efforts, I think Rob mentioned this in the review that he did for the Doctor Who show. It felt grounded in reality because you've got real actors wearing real armor, and there is a certain realism that you can get through that CGI can't quite manage. Would you say, Rob?
That is a very neat segue into when I got very excited about the film. It was in those street scenes where you had stormtroopers pursuing Cassian Andor and his informant through the streets. And I thought, holy hell, this is the original Stormtrooper armor on film again, and it's for real. I got a sense of that in Force Awakens, where you had real guys in Stormtrooper armor, but of course it's modern Stormtrooper armor. And I got a sense of it in Star Wars Rebels, where you've got the original Stormtrooper armor, albeit quite a stylized version of it running around, although that's animated. But here, finally, at last, the original armor for real on screen. I was like, oh, this is great. This is great. And then, of course, that continued all through the film, the Yavin scenes like Simon mentioned. And of course, when all the squadrons report in at the end of the film, and there's blue and gold and red squadron, I was like, oh, wow. And yeah, just, I've said it before today, but again, it was just pornography for me as a Star Wars fan. Just utter pornography.
I think we all laughed. I think the whole line of us, there's about 5 of us went, I think we all laughed when Red Leader made his appearance. Yeah. And we suddenly realised they were taking little... Biggs was there as well, wasn't he? Was Biggs there? I think he was.
I don't recall Biggs. I was looking out for Porkins myself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, it was just, that was, we just all laughed because it was kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, it just worked. So, I don't know. I don't know what they did there. I don't know whether they dubbed over new lines or whether they literally had lines from Star Wars in there. I don't know. But I mean, I don't know. It just, the stuff worked, didn't it? It really did. There are some criticisms that it has kind of played to the fans a little bit too much, and a little bit too much continuity and that sort of thing. But it worked, and I think it was done so beautifully. It's funny you say about the fact that there's real actors and suits and all that sort of thing. That was great. But also, like when the AT-ATs turned up, I just accepted that they were there and they were AT-ATs. It was just real.
Exactly, and we're seeing them in a new environment. We're very used to seeing them on Hoth, and of course there was one on Endor, but we didn't really see it doing much. I think it was pretty much parked at the landing pad. Yeah, they used a lot more of the ATSTs in the battle for Endor. But here, to see it walking along the beach, a beach in Star Wars, what? This is great.
Yeah, well, I mean that's in the ATST going through the town as well.
Yeah,
you just accepted it, and the beauty of it was they got it moving like the original fast motion animation. It had the same characteristics of movement. Just the attention to detail was just awesome. It was off the scale. It really was.
I really enjoyed I think as a collective, I think the ensemble that made up the Rogue One team overall were very good. The standout, I think Simon said this as well, we went to see it, was for me was the droid. I keep wanting to call him KRS-One, but that's not his name. But I thought he was great.
I'm going to call him that from now on, though. That is that's... Oh yeah, no, he was really good. They gave him all the best lines. I mean, I've heard again, I've heard some criticism that the pacing of the movie changes about halfway through. That may be true, but I don't think that's a fault. The thing I thought was that the characters didn't necessarily come alive till about halfway through the movie. But then you're talking these personalities where they are going to be withdrawn, and they are going to be fairly machine-like, because they are, they are characters of warfare. So they don't give away much, and it's only when they kind of get together in the group that they start showing their colours. Particularly the central character, who's obviously has learnt to survive and is probably hiding away a lot of emotions. So you're not going to get much from them. So the kind of the droid is there to break that up, and so I think the more I'm kind of talking myself into it. I cannot wait to get a copy on Blu-ray to just watch. I think it could well be a film. I think I've watched Force Awakens since I've had it on Blu-ray maybe once in different chunks, and there hasn't necessarily been a draw to keep going back and watching it over and over again when I thought I would. But I do think this might be one where I do, because I think it will be a film that kind of progresses in your own mind as you watch it, and you get more from it. It's quite subtle, I think.
Yeah, something I said on Facebook recently, which sort of ties into that. This movie felt like it was made for my generation, whereas The Force Awakens, I can go and see that and enjoy it, and it continues the saga, and that's great. But it didn't necessarily feel like it was my generation's Star Wars. Again, I can enjoy it, but it didn't feel quite right. And I can agree with you. I've watched it, I think, once since I bought the disc as well. I'm very pleased I have the disc. I will watch it again in the future, but I haven't watched it over and over and over and over. I do think I'll watch this over and over and over and over, just because it's got that childhood feel to it. This is my Star Wars, in quotation marks.
I think it definitely merits a second cinema viewing. I feel there's so much that's sort of been densely packed into it that I feel I've probably missed things, and I really would like to go back and just watch it again and really try and take it all in again. Probably in a slightly more awake state as well, which would probably help.
Did you find yourself checking off a lot of the alien species?
There's
Twi'leks in there, wasn't there? And the squid heads, or whatever they are. What are they called, Rob? Would you remember?
Oh, I always colloquially say squid head myself.
Oh, right, okay. I can't remember the called. They live on the same planet.
Like calamari or something?
They live on the same planet as the calamari, don't they? I think they live under water or something.
They do, and to my shame, I can't think of their name. Oh, that's terrible.
You bad fans.
It begins with a Q. No, I can't remember.
Are they Quarren?
Quarren, yes.
There we go.
There we are, yeah. But we had a very brief conversation, didn't we, Rob, on Facebook? I don't know if it was earlier today. Well, hour today anyway. It was yesterday for you. About our brains, our old adult brains. I mean, I certainly remember so much about the original trilogy but I cannot kind of recall so much stuff about the prequels or anything like that. I mean, that's just the way the brain works, isn't it? It's open to these things when you're younger. But this I found myself thinking of the species names as I was watching the film and thinking, "Ooh, I do know a lot."
yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm the same with Doctor Who. I can remember things from shows I've watched 30 years ago better than I can remember things that happened a series or two ago on telly. So, yeah, I know where you're coming from. I have a question about this film, and it's something that shone for me, and that's the way the Rebel Alliance don't seem to be as cohesive or shiny, happy family as they've perhaps been portrayed in the past. There was disagreement between them, arguing. It didn't feel like maybe we've thought the Rebel Alliance is meant to be. Cassian Andor executes his informant early on in the film.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal, wasn't it?
And perhaps this is a more realistic Rebel Alliance, but did you sense it was a different, in some ways, Rebel Alliance to what you've seen in the past?
I think maybe it's my way of trying to retcon it, but to me it seemed like they were a bit more raw and ragged because they hadn't really scored a really big victory. They probably have in Rebels or whatever, but perhaps they're perhaps a bit more together in A New Hope, because they've actually managed to get hold of these plans, and it feels like the tide is turning a bit. But yeah, they do seem a bit disparate and not necessarily cohesive as a force at this point.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Mark. I think that what is so clever about the plot in this film and the things that it makes sense of from the original Star Wars films, that this was a sequence of events that this film sets off. So Star Wars is literally the sequel to Rogue One, or A New Hope. It's almost like the Rebel Alliance become focused because all of a sudden this sequence of events kicks off with the plans being grabbed, and they're trying to fly across the galaxy to get the plans to the Rebel Alliance, and they manage to catch the ship, and that's the beginning of A New Hope. But that's all started with this film, so there's not a lot else the Rebel Alliance can do apart from pull together and make sure that happens. All of a sudden they've all got to pull together and make sure that they destroy the Death Star, essentially. And I guess that's why they feel so much more polarized in A New Hope. I mean, that, yeah, like you say, that's retconning it. But I think Rob's right. I think it's a very different Rebel Alliance from what we're aware of. It's a far more mercenary and disorganized and fractious thing, which is, as you say, is probably more realistic and makes for a meatier story, certainly, and certainly meatier characters as well.
On the subject of characters, what did we think of the main bad guy, who I've already forgotten his name, going back to what Rob was saying about being able to remember stuff from 30-odd years ago?
Orson Krennic.
That's the chap.
Well, I'll jump in first, being the Australian here, played by an Australian in the form of Ben Mendelsohn. Mm-hmm. Orson Krennic is a fantastic character. My wife is absolutely in love with him. She came out of that film and said, she's American, so she said, I need some action figures of that guy. I need some action figures. And I'm like, okay, I'll get you some action figures. She goes, he looks pretty good for an old guy, don't you think? And I'm like, yeah, he does. He's great. But
this possibly explains why Donald Trump ended up where he is now. Anyway, we're digressing.
So for me, I thought he was a perfect Imperial officer. The arrogance, the needing to be acclaimed for his Death Star success, to the point where he even flies off to see Darth Vader to tell him, go and tell the Emperor I did this, And it's like, wow, the arrogance. This is so Imperial officer. This is exactly how I think they are. And the way he bickers and fights also with Tarkin. They're not a shiny, happy, cohesive family either. The Empire, they're all out for their own glory as well. And I thought that was really interesting. He is a great actor. If anyone has Netflix, watch the 2 seasons of Bloodline that are out there. He plays an amazing character in Bloodline, but he's done so many great films as well. I can't speak highly enough of Ben Mendelsohn, or Mendo, as I like to call him.
Simon?
It was a brilliantly written character, I know that, and certainly a brilliantly written bad guy. There's that word of advice I keep hearing about when you write your bad guys, you've got to write them that they believe, or as far as they're concerned, they're the good guys. And a lot of the time, the way they behave comes from a belief that they are doing the right thing. And I very much got that from that character. I mean, to the point where there were grey areas where I wasn't quite sure which way he was going to go. I didn't know whether he was actually going to end up helping by the end of the film, because there was that duplicity to him, and also the fact there was a relationship with Jen's father. It was just a really lovely, meaty, multi-dimensional, is that the word, character who was living and breathing on the screen, because you could see him making decisions in his head as he got to things, and that's not something we're used to seeing in Star Wars. Not really.
No.
Everyone's very black and white, and probably Han Solo has been the most complex character we've had. And that was mainly from Harrison Ford, kind of injecting that, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. They don't see themselves as evil, all the best bad guys, and Krennic doesn't see himself as evil either. At the very start of the film, when he's trying to he's trying to get Jin's father back to the Empire. He's saying, come back and do this for the good of the Empire, as if the Empire is a really great thing. And I guess a lot of people compare the Empire mostly to Nazis in terms of the uniforms, the way they act and so on. But I also think of the Roman Empire as well. I could imagine a Roman being very proud of their empire and do this for the Empire. But, of course, if you're one of the oppressed peasants in one of the far-off, lands they've conquered, maybe you don't think the Empire's so great. So, I can totally buy into the fact he believes in the Empire and probably doesn't think it's evil at all. They're bringing peace to the galaxy, I think even might have been one of the quotes.
It goes to show how unspoiled I was. I didn't even realise that Mads Mikkelsen was in the film, so it was a real surprise to see him, and I really like him as an actor. I thought he was very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he didn't get a lot of screen time, but when he was on, he was absolutely solid, completely believable, which allowed you to feel real sympathy at the end when, near the end, when Jin runs over to him as he's dying. You haven't seen these characters together a lot, but you still felt there was a real relationship there, and he was someone absolutely to be mourned for.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really spoken about Jin, have we? What did you think of her as a character? I guess there are going to be parallels with Rey from The Force Awakens. I thought she was very well portrayed by the actress.
Yeah, I can't fault her really. As I said before, she wasn't giving away a lot initially. Well, do you know what it is? It's because we're so used to seeing, I suppose, emotional female characters on screen. So when you get somebody who's very controlled and she's a survivor, she's not going to give much away. It comes as something you sort of I don't know whether you expect female characters to behave a certain way. You do get. It's the stereotypes we're talking about, which is what makes this film and certainly The Force Awakens so important and so just so timely. I think brilliant, strong character, really, and certainly her story through the film. She takes a journey. I don't know. I was trying to make sense of her death at the end, and whether that it was something. I don't know, but I suppose nobody deserves to die. But was it kind of resolving something? Was it, was it some kind of absolution for her father? I don't know. I was trying to figure it out, probably thinking too much about it, really. But I was trying to resolve in my head the fact that she ends up dying for the cause. But maybe it's the fact that she has found a cause and found something to live for, which is the completion of her story. I suppose that's what I'm trying to think of, does her story completely become fulfilled? Does she do what she needs to do and then she can die sort of peacefully? I don't know. I'm probably thinking far too much about it.
No, I think so. I think it is the end of her story, so what happens is probably for the best. I was kind of confused as to how her and Cassian are running around having these fights. They're full of vim and vigour. This tsunami of land flying towards them, they've got some time to find a shuttle or to find a ship and get away. They've got the energy to do it, but they just sort of sit down on the beach and think, oh, well, we're stuffed, and just wait for it to happen. It seemed slightly, in trying to draw out the moment, I think they made it last too long and was making me think, just get up and find a shuttle. There's ships all around this place. Give it a go. They seem to give up too easily. If it perhaps happened a little bit quicker, it might have seemed more realistic. But then again, if it happened a little bit quicker, you wouldn't have had the same emotion that they're about to die and the screen's going to, just blow out to white as it does. It's only a small criticism, and I don't like criticising the film because I actually quite liked it. I really liked it, but I guess if we're just trying to find things to talk about and to nitpick a little and get into the plot, that's one area that I picked up on.
I mean, talking about plot points and things that perhaps didn't necessarily sit well, this does a pretty decent job of explaining what, for some more picky people, would perhaps suggests is a major plot point from the original Star Wars movie is the fact they've got this exhaust port, which is such an absolute design flaw that's going to cause the thing to blow up if you aim a rocket at it. And it's explained in this that it was actually put in there on purpose as a way to destroy the weapon.
That was it was great. I think it on paper, I'm not sure whether I would think it was a good idea or not, but in action, I thought it was really great. I thought it was really good, really clever, and adds depth to Jin's father as well. And we all know that there were situations, and there are situations like that in wartime where you'll get somebody who's literally working for something they don't believe in, and they work from the inside out to try and kind of scupper their plans because they're protecting the family and they're protecting their own lives. So yeah, it felt a very real thing, and it's a very, very clever piece of writing, if you ask me.
Yeah, I was delighted that was in the film, so forevermore no one will be able to point at that exhaust port and say, why was that there? That's quite silly. It's part of the story now, and I think that's great.
And I think, as Simon said, it fleshes out that the character played by Mads Mikkelsen, and just although he's working for the Empire, he is not necessarily an evil person, and gives you a slightly different view of the universe that we've seen so far. We haven't mentioned Darth Vader yet. How cool was it to see him back on screen? It was just great, really. And of course, I think they used him fairly sparingly, didn't they?
I think so. Yeah, I think they could have gone really overboard with it. I like the fact that we saw Darth Vader in full pathological mode of slaughtering those soldiers, which was horrible. But at the same time, you just got an impression of that's him at his full power. You have that danger, don't you, of the fact that this is happening supposedly before the original films, and he's doing a lot more than he has done, than he does in the films. But I think it kind of works. I guess he's older by that point. Do they give the impression there's even less of him, don't they? When you see him in that pod?
It's quite a reveal, isn't it, when you see him for the first time in the movie?
Absolutely, in the Bacta tank there. But I was going to say, yes, when we watch these films back to back in the future, he'll have seemed a lot calmed down at the start of episode 4 than what he was 5 minutes earlier.
Yeah, got it out of his system. Maybe that's what it is. I was just thinking, I can't remember the actor's name. I don't know how you pronounce it. Alan Tudyk, is it? That sounds wrong. Oh dear. Anyway, bloke from Firefly, who obviously was the voice of the robot.
Yes.
Yeah, I hadn't actually made that connection at all.
Sorry, guys, you just broke up there a bit for me. I missed it. I think you were talking about Alan Tudyk being the voice of the robot.
That's how you say it. Yeah, I was saying it a slightly different way, which the emphasis was slightly different and gave a completely different. Yes. So the delivery from the robot wasn't just the lines, it was delivery as well, very dry and great. Have we seen a droid behave like that? I imagine that's how IG-88 probably kind of operated.
In some of the video games like Knights of the Old Republic, you certainly have droids that have personalities and sort of wisecracking or a bit evil and such. So they've been seen before in some ways.
Okay. So
where do you think we're going to head off next? So we've got the Han Solo movie. It's going to be the next of these spin-offs. Do you think that's going to directly tie in with this, or is that just going to be its own thing? That seems to be the impression I'm getting. Not that I've really read any spoilers.
Well, I guess to be a younger Han Solo, he has to be younger than he was in A New Hope. And, of course, Rogue One and A New Hope are basically happening around the same day or two. Presumably it's 10 years earlier than this. So obviously the Republic has fallen. Stormtroopers will look like Stormtroopers. TIE fighters will look like TIE fighters. It will have this feel. but I don't think it will tie into these events. The rebellion will be much more small time than it is here. They might not even have X-Wings yet. Who knows? Will he be even involved with the rebellion? I assume not, although it might be a thing out there in the universe. Will they keep the backstory that has been peddled in the past, that he was an Imperial officer, didn't like how the Wookiees were being treated, rescued Chewbacca, and they went off to have adventures? They may keep that. They may do something completely different. I really have no idea, and I'm quite open-minded about it, which I didn't think once upon a time I would be, because how can you replace Harrison Ford? But
yeah, quite.
I'm willing to go with it, because Han Solo is one of my favourite characters in all the Star Wars films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know where I've picked up various bits and pieces. My understanding of Han Solo he was conscripted into the Imperial forces, wasn't he? He was an ex-stormtrooper at once, or was he trained up as a stormtrooper?
I always read it as he was an officer or in officer training at the Imperial Academy, which in the Star Wars universe is no weird thing. Luke wants to go off to the Academy. By the Academy, he means the Imperial Academy, because it's what you do. The Empire is the ruling body, and you go off there. You're not thinking, I'm going off to be evil at this place. You think, well, that's the Imperial Academy, where you go to get a job and, join the army, basically. Or the Navy, really.
Well, I was going to say how timely this film is to a degree, with a lot of stuff that's going on in the world. I found myself thinking, do I want to watch at this very point in time, do I want to watch a war movie? And as it was, I felt it was important because it was well told. Yeah, it just worked so well for me. And what would be really nice and I think appropriate for a Han Solo movie, is if that is the case, we're seeing a young Han who is in the Academy, that we are seeing some parallels. I think we're probably talking Hitler Youth sort of situations, with the young being taken into the forces. And this kind of normalization thing that I hope isn't going on, where people start thinking that this kind of thinking that we're seeing in the world today is not normal. And like you say, that you've got characters like Han and Luke wanting to join the Academy because that's what you do. No thought about what that actually entails and whether it's morally correct. And I think it's a really good opportunity to address that sort of thing within the movie. And that would give you a whole emotional point, and certainly give you, the reasons why Han would have left and gone on his own and become a smuggler and probably, decided to drop out, basically.
Yeah, at the time of A New Hope, and even 10 years earlier when this Han Solo film might be set, the Empire is the status quo. You think of Luke in A New Hope saying, you know of the rebellion against the Empire? Like, wow, like that's really out there. That's something he would have never considered in his life, because it's just not the status quo. It's not what you do. So, yeah, there could be some interesting stories to be told in there. I think I agree. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's the fact you've got these two streams of movies coming out. It's very clever from Disney's point of view in terms of they're trying their best to please everyone. And I think certainly my take on certainly Rogue One is that it's primarily aimed at slightly more mature fans, shall we say. But obviously kids are going to want to go and see it. But also, you've got the Saga series that's still rolling on, and that's kind of got a life of its own. So the fact you've got these offshoots gives you the flexibility to tell different stories. And you could have a Han Solo story that's got no real kind of direct connection to what's gone on in any of the other films. It could just be his kind of adventures as a smuggler and getting into scrapes and things. And I think it's really exciting. I really look forward to seeing them.
And to bring it
Ironic,
back...
yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, ironically, you almost get the Indiana Jones situation where you could have a series of Han Solo movies. Now they've got a younger actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And to bring it back to what I was talking about at the start of this podcast, the books, the Extended Universe books, that's exactly what they did. You had different stories being told. There were ones where the big three characters were in there. You had ones like Rogue Squadron where it was lesser characters. You had ones that did different things and took you to different places. And reading the Extended Universe as a whole gave you a feeling that I think people will now get through the films as we have both the saga films and the anthology films, and it becomes this much bigger, wider, more diverse universe where loads of stuff happens, and it's not just about what the Skywalker family's up to this week.
Mm-hmm. I was going to go back to, how did you feel about things like were they called Death Squad troopers? Is it the black ones?
Yes, the new look that
suits.
Walk around with Orson Krennic. I think they were calling them Death Troopers or something along those lines.
Yeah.
When things like this get introduced, I think, oh, I've not seen them in A New Hope, so how do they exist here and not there? And my brain goes a bit funny. But once I get over that hurdle, I thought, oh, that's a pretty interesting design. They're similar, I guess, to what I think they called Shadow Troopers in some of the games, which were basically stormtroopers painted black. They were pretty cool. They were like Krennic's Praetorian Guard almost, just getting around with him.
I quite like the U-wing fighters.
Yeah, they were cool.
Because they made sense as being like a progression of the Jedi starfighters, weren't they? When you look at them, they're kind of very similar to the one that Anakin's flying around in Revenge of the Sith. But I did keep thinking it was Buck Rogers' starfighter. From Buck Rogers in the 25th century, really similar. I just out of interest, I thought, it can't be right, and I put them next to each other in Photoshop, and they're really similar profiles. Even the engines at the back are really similar. Really
it could be quite deliberate in a homage kind of way.
Yeah, maybe.
Someone else has said to me that the Ghost, which is the ship from Star Wars Rebels that the crew gets around on, makes an appearance somewhere in the film as well. Maybe it's in the background of a shot or something. I'll have to investigate that further. There's apparently a lot of Easter eggs, many more than the obvious ones that we've all clocked already.
Okay. That's like they put the ship from Shadows of the Empire into the special edition of Star Wars, didn't they?
Exactly, taking off from Mos Eisley, yeah.
Yeah. But
of course, this is the first film that hasn't had John Williams doing the music. What did you guys think of that?
Well, his older themes made it into newer pieces of music. In fact, when you look at the run list for the new soundtrack, you see all the names of the tracks, and in brackets next to maybe half of them is featuring blah 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 by John Williams. So he does sneak in there here and there. On the whole, I thought the music was pretty good, and given that I didn't really rate Williams' effort on Force Awakens, I didn't think that was a particularly strong soundtrack at all. It relied too much on the older themes, and the newer stuff wasn't that memorable to me at all. People say, well, what about Rey's theme? I say, well, how does Rey's theme go? I have no idea. Nothing in that soundtrack that was new stood out to me. So it's a fairly low bar for this new composer to be up against, because I think Williams' recent output, although this is sacrilege to say, apparently just wasn't very good. I hope he has a much better return to form for episode 8 of the saga stories.
So is it going to be John Williams for episode 8 then?
Yes.
Is that confirmed?
Yes.
It is. Oh, right. Okay. Any thoughts, Simon?
Well, I think we looked at each other, or we certainly mentioned it after the film, about the music. I didn't really notice the soundtrack until the little motifs started appearing that we already knew. But I think we both mentioned afterwards, because of course we didn't have the crawl at the start, did we? We didn't have the yellow writing going up the screen, which was really interesting. The fact they went straight into the action, which I loved, and there was no big delay at the start or anything like that. And of course the title came up, and then there was that really weird, almost like K-Tel does Star Wars, where it was just like a slightly altered Star Wars theme, where they come up with these themes on comedy shows where it's supposed to sound a bit like Star Wars, but it isn't Star Wars.
Yeah.
We're not breaking copyright.
James Last, I'm just checking that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rob, I interrupted you.
No.
Lovely bits of music in the what planet were they on? Oh, I'm trying to think. In the town, there was all that music in the background, which kind of reminded me of the cantina and Jabba's palace.
Yeah,
going on in the background.
Yeah.
That's the stuff I love, where it does literally sound like another planet. Before they started introducing awful soul and I don't know, the special edition stuff they put into Jabba's palace.
Yeah, that was an unusual choice.
I liked the space jazz. I mean, yeah, of course they listen to space jazz. But are we going to get more Ewok spin-off films? That's what I want to know. Oh, I've just remembered something else I really liked in the film was the inclusion of Bail Organa.
Oh yeah.
Jimmy, I can't remember.
Jimmy Smits.
Yeah. That immediately ties it into the prequels, which is going to shut everyone up. And it's like, yeah, the prequels are canon. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was a seriously underused character in the prequels. If you ask me, he could have been really, have a lot more to do rather than just be Yoda's taxi driver.
Yeah, he could have done heaps more. Obviously, he didn't get to do much in this one, but there were some nice lines about him knowing a Jedi who could possibly help out. That was nice. Then, of course, he's like, I'm off to Alderaan. No, Bail, you really don't want to go there.
Yeah, come back. I know. Yeah.
No, I think it's fair to say we really enjoyed it. I know, Rob, you like to rate things, don't you? And I think you gave it an 8 out of 10.
I gave it a very solid 8 out of 10. That's right. I came home and recorded a very bleary-eyed video for you, not YouTube, for Facebook. Give it an 8 out of 10. Good night. I'm out here. And I stand by that. It's not a perfect film, but what film is? And I don't even really like putting a rating on it, to be honest. But if I had to, it's a solid 8 out of 10. It's a great film. I enjoyed it very much. It's how I imagined battles to be in the Star Wars universe when I was a kid playing with my toys. It ticked all the right boxes for me. Thumbs up.
I think one of my favourite quotes of Simon's when we've done the Blue Box podcast together is he's talking about music, and he'll say that often the 8 out of 10 albums are the best ones.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. And it's the same with films. I think I can't really think of a perfect film. There's probably perfect films that are highly rated in general, where people just say, oh, it's just a brilliant, perfect film. Like a lot of people say Back to the Future is a perfect film, isn't it? Supposedly. It's a great film. But no, I'm completely with Rob. 8 out of 10 is about right. I don't think it's a 9 out of 10, which suggests that it's near to perfection, because it doesn't kind of scream from the rooftops. So what I love about it is that it is subtle when it needs to be. And it's a slow burner in that respect. And I think, as Rob said, we're going to come back to this and watch it again and again and again.
Yeah.
We'll probably get a lot more out of this film than most Star Wars films, really.
It's a really solid film. Just, it delivers on everything you expect.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who wants to hit the top anyway? If we're going to get more of these films. And as you say, maybe we'll get some more sort of comedic films. We'll get some. I hope we don't get the Deadpool of Star Wars films. I really do. I hope that there is a kind of a level maybe where the Marvel films hit, where they're not too gruesome or anything like that. I think
Disney would have a pretty firm hand on the tiller when it comes to making decisions like that. I can't imagine them going too far off.
Because I was convinced I saw a stormtrooper's leg come off in one of the explosions, and I don't know whether that was just the way it was filmed. I thought, ooh. And then I thought, no, maybe I didn't see that. Maybe it's just the way it looked. And I thought, ooh, I think
the closest we might get to Deadpool territory is if there was a standalone Boba Fett film or something.
Yeah.
He deals in pretty dark, nasty stuff. But I agree, too, that Disney wouldn't let it go too far. But I think if any of the characters would deliver a really dark film, it's probably Boba Fett.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of scope for a bounty hunter movie. Well, obviously, Boba Fett being the fan favourite, I think that could be really exciting.
Yeah.
So it'd be cool to see what they can come up with.
Absolutely. As long as we're not going to get a Leia movie. Which I would like if they cast someone else, but if she's going to walk around with a plastic head all the time, I'm not sure it's going to work.
Well, it's interesting because they did a standalone Leia comic, which we were reviewing back in the days when the Who Wars podcast existed, and it was a bit of a bore. It wasn't a great comic, and this was a chance, with just a limited mini-series, let's tell a great Leia story, and it just wasn't that interesting. So, it does give pause for thought with how they should treat someone like Leia. They can obviously do female protagonists well. I mean, look at these last 2 Star Wars films we've had.
Yeah.
But the Leia comic just was not good at all. I'd really hope they'd put some thought into it, because
it's a missed opportunity.
It was big time.
I mean, theoretically, all of these characters could be expanded upon. Lando. Who else? Which is even some of the minor characters. I think that's probably possibly what people want to look for. I mean, it's worked for Marvel. I mean, you think about Guardians of the Galaxy. When they first announced that, I couldn't believe that because, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy was a backup strip in the old Star Wars Weekly. Completely different lineup. I think and the original Star-Lord strip was in Star Wars Weekly as well. That's a nice little segue, isn't it? But to take some of these sort of slightly unknown characters is a lot of the time is more interesting than going for the big guys. So
well, I know a friend of the show, Ben Schneider, will be desperately hoping for a Dengar movie.
I was just going to say Dengar, yeah.
Well, speaking of Lando, he will pop up in the young Han Solo film, so he's covered off there. That's
Isn't it Don Glover they've got to play him?
I think so, yeah. I mean, because the guy's been out there tweeting about it. It's not like a big secret or anything. So that's one piece of information I do know about it, even though I'm trying to stay unspoiled.
Mm-hmm. They'll do a Lobot movie.
Hey, I could be in with a chance there. I've got my headphones on. I look vaguely, maybe.
Yeah.
So, guys, I think we've pretty much covered as much as we can of Rogue One. What we like to do at the end of the show is just to get a few recommendations from our guests for the listeners to check out. So I'm going to put Rob on the spotlight first. Have you got anything you'd like to share with us?
Oh, I do. It's quite timely too. In the last week or so, I believe, because my wife gave me the news, we've heard that Marco Polo, the Netflix series, has been axed. And this is a huge shame because Marco Polo is my recommendation. If you've got Netflix, look up Marco Polo. There's 2 seasons of it. It's fantastic. Kublai Khan. No, not Kublai Khan. Hang on. Oh, yes, it is Kublai Khan. You can edit this, Mark. Kublai Khan is played by Benedict Wong, who many people will know now from the Doctor Strange film. And you have Marco Polo turn up as a young Venetian. He is played by an Italian actor. And unlike the Hollywood trend to cast people of not the correct race in these roles, this film is packed to the rafters with Asian actors because they're up in China. It's fantastic. It's all in English. I sometimes wonder whether people think, that might be a foreign sort of production. It is made overseas, but it is full of people speaking English. Great storylines, and it just never took off. Maybe the first episode or 2 is a bit slow and doesn't draw people in, but by the time you get halfway through the first season, and by the end of the first season, you're loving it. I love the second season, but now it's all canned, and that's a great shame. It apparently resulted in a $200 million loss for Netflix.
Wow.
So
I must admit, it's on my to-watch list, but I haven't got around to watching it, so it's all my fault.
Yeah, look, my wife and I loved every minute of it. It was a huge co-production, the Weinstein Company and Netflix. It should have done big business, and it just didn't. And it's so strange because it's like Game of Thrones, but real life. What can I say?
And Simon?
This isn't so much a recommendation. Well, it's a recommendation in as much as we've got the brand new Dirk Gently series on Netflix. And admittedly, I've only watched the first 2 episodes, I think I've just started into the second episode.
Okay.
And I was just going to recommend people to kind of leave your expectations at the door. It's another one of those. The amount of Douglas Adams fans I've seen ranting on Facebook saying this is an insult to Douglas Adams. It's nothing like Dirk Gently. It's nothing like the books. Blah blah blah, all that stuff. It was never going to be that. And the way I see it is they've taken the Dirk Gently character, picked him up, and plonked him in America. And again, going back to the violence, it's a little bit too violent for my liking. I don't actually know why it's quite as bloodthirsty as it is, because it kind of doesn't sit right with the Douglas Adams humour. And there's me saying, oh, it should be more Douglas Adams. But I think because you've got this character in the centre of it all who is, I think he's pretty much behaving like he does in the books in some respects. It kind of doesn't sit right with the other stuff that's going on. But it is quite nice in that he's kind of this little kind of place of calm in amongst all this kind of violent chaos that's going on around him. But what I was going to say was that just approach it with a clear mind and let it be what it wants to be, because I think it actually works really well. And some of the writing is just amazing. And I think again, without courting kind of severe opinions on things, if you're a fan of kind of the fast and quick and all over the place kind of Stephen Moffat style of writing, then I think you really enjoy it, because it is incredibly complex, but it's really quite beautiful in places. I think as far as the writing's concerned. So I'm hooked, and I'm going to keep watching it. But I do think it's an animal all of its own. I don't think you're going to do yourself any favours by expecting it to be the Dirk Gently that you know and possibly you've seen on the British television programme. It's a different thing altogether, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think it works really well.
And, of course, features Samuel Barnett, who is my choice for the next Doctor in Doctor Who, has been for about 5 years, by the way. I try and say this on every podcast and write it in every place I can, so that when it finally happens...
Have you got some money on at the bookies?
Well, I should. When it finally happens, I can point back to all these places and say, yes, see, told you. I have even told Samuel Barnett he should be the next Doctor on Twitter. He wrote back and said, wouldn't that be dreamy? So, I've already put the thought in his mind as
guys.
well.
Well, it's quite a coupling of him and Elijah Wood. It just works really, really well. The casting is brilliant and the acting is brilliant, and it's very, very funny in places. Again, I've heard people saying, "Well, it's not Douglas Adams humour," but I think what they've done is taken the core idea, this idea of everything being connected, and taken it to an extreme, really, where it is. It's just it comes across as mad, but then things start making sense in your own head. I've already kind of worked out a couple of things that are going on. It is very, very complex, but I think it works.
My wife Amy is a huge Douglas Adams fan, and I think she's watched the first couple of episodes, and I think she's of a similar mind to you, Simon. You've got to kind of leave expectations at the door and just approach it for what it is. She's a huge fan of Richard Schiff, so that certainly helps to keep her interest.
The thing is, too, that we've already had a series of Dirk Gently. So, certain things have already been done, and so the books are their own thing, and the previous series is its own thing. This is a new thing, and so I've embraced it that way myself, too.
Well, I think this is going to be a hat-trick of Netflix recommendations. This is, old news now, because... it's been and gone and what have you, but I really enjoyed Luke Cage.
Yes.
I didn't really know very much about the character at all, unlike you guys who are really into your comics. But I just picked it up and ran with it. I found it really... it's kind of the video equivalent of a book you just can't put down. So, because Netflix have this habit of dropping a whole series at a time... it was compulsive viewing. I really enjoyed it.
Well, when we talk B grade and C grade comic books, like Simon was talking about Guardians of the Galaxy earlier, and then becoming a massive movie, here's a comic book star who is not a huge comic book star, and yet it's been made into a wonderful series. And perhaps the same can be said of Iron Fist, which is coming up on Netflix as well. I don't know whether you'd agree to, Simon.
Iron Fist, yes. It's not one I read. Really, like you say, it was quite an obscure character. So that my experience of them was where they were crossover episodes, or issues where they would suddenly pop up in a Spider-Man comic or something like that. I seem to remember one. There was a really one with beautiful artwork where it was Spider-Man, Black Widow, Iron Fist, and somebody else. It was all versus the Silver Samurai. So they just popped up every now and again. You never really got to know them. But the interesting thing is that a character like Luke Cage, who, as far as I'm aware, was introduced for kind of black representation in the comics, as was the original, was obviously Black Panther. And you got Black Panther coming, and I'm really looking forward to that film. See, that was a character who never kind of grabbed my imagination in the comics, but I'm so looking forward to the movie because of how they treated him in Civil War. I just thought, this it just really worked for me. So but so I mean, it's kind of doubling back on the comics thing of expanding these characters so that it probably feeds back into the comics again. They're getting a new kind of revived interest. But I've got a dream of bringing back the Micronauts, which was a comic strip that was which came out off the back of the toys that came out in the was it in the early 80s or late 70s? No, it was late 70s, wasn't it? It was around Star Wars time. And again, it was a backup strip in Star Wars Weekly, and then it went into Star Heroes Pocketbook here in the UK. And I think it was revived a few years back by someone, and that didn't work. But I still want to bring that one back. But again, it's these really odd, forgotten comics where you then get this ability. You're saying about Douglas Adams, the fact that people kind of try and restrict you. They have expectations of what it's going to be because they're so successful. You get comics like that where not so many people know, and you've got the ability to turn it into something new, which I think is quite exciting.
Definitely. And even, Iron Man was a sort of a B-grade comic book character back in the day. Kids would not believe that today if you told them that. They just think of the movies and Robert Downey Jr. and how wonderful it is. But Iron Man was never top tier, top shelf comic book hero, to my mind. And so that's another example,
Well, on the subject of comic books, possibly embarrassing Rob just fractionally, I've been asked to say a huge thank you to Rob, who bid on a couple of Paul Cornell comics, which was a thing that my wife has been doing for a while, which is a charity auction page on Facebook, which is there to raise funds for a charity called Hope for HH. It's called Book Auctions for Hope for HH if you seek it out on Facebook. And Rob was the lucky guy who won those Paul Cornell books, and she just wanted to thank you for your bid.
Oh, well, thank you. I did the easy part. I just, pulled out my PayPal account. It's Amy who's doing all the hard work and sourcing all the books and, sending them off and all that sort of stuff. So thank you to Amy for doing this on behalf of the charity. It's really great stuff.
No, that's good. Much appreciated. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you both so much for coming on. It's been a little while since we had an episode out, and hopefully it won't be too much longer before we get another one. Well,
thank you. Just having the chance to talk about it is lovely. We don't really get when we talk about Star Wars films or anything outside of Doctor Who on the Blue Box podcast. It's always a little bit of a side note, so it's nice to actually focus on it and talk like a Star Wars fan with other Star Wars fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, this is a chance to get a little plug in. Sorry, I should have done that at the start. But so Simon, you can be heard regularly on the Starburst Blue Box podcast.
I can, as can you, sporadically.
Every now and again, yeah. And Rob, you are the producer of a pretty busy stream on the old Podbean, the Doctor Who show.
Yes, we chopped up the show into its core parts, and so now it pops out at all different times of the month as different little segments for people to enjoy, or hopefully enjoy. But I just wanted to say thank you for having me on this episode too, Mark. It's great as the man who killed your podcast the last time I came on to be able to rectify that this time around.
No, it's I very heartily recommend the Doctor Who show. It's great. There's something for everyone. There's just such a great variety of different subjects and people who get involved. My particular favourite, apart from obviously Rob and David do their reviews, which are very entertaining my absolute favourite is Ian Martin's A to Z of Doctor Who. It's
It's funny.
pant-wettingly funny.
Yeah, I'm privileged to get those early, obviously, every month, and I just sit here laughing as I listen to it before I upload it. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you both so much, and
Well, I hope you're going to invite us back on when they do the Salacious Crumb movie.
Oh yes, please.
you heard it here first, folks.
Brilliant.
Thank you both.
Lovely.
Thank you so much.
Well,
That was great.
Have a good
fun.
day. Have a good day, Rob, and
Yeah, enjoy
sleep well,
yourself.
Mark.
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah, it's all in front of me now. It's just gone 10 a.m. I've got a whole Sunday to do stuff. It's fantastic.
I did really well. I did the whole podcast without taking issue with Australians seeing Star Wars before us.
It's because they live in the future,
Yes.
Simon.
It's not right, you know.
It's great.
I
The
can't. In the old days, though, you could take ownership of it because most of it was filmed in Pinewood, but you can't do that anymore.
No, not anymore.
No. Well, we could take ownership of 2 of the prequels, but we didn't want to.
Oh dear! You're not still recording, are you, Mark? That's a
That might
brilliant.
go in as an Easter egg. I won't put the rest in.
That is a good Easter egg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.